One of the main riches of Russia is the sacred sea of Baikal, and now, more than ever, the probability of losing it at all is high. And the reason for this is the greed and venality of the federal authorities. We'll talk about this today. This program What Happened? More thrash, more hell on the air. Let's go. This is the city of Ulan-Ude. The next train with wood is sent to China. We will fill up the goods yard with a bar of PRC standards. They cut everything and everywhere, they do not disdain anything. The forest here pallets everywhere, indiscriminately. Larch, pine, birch, whatever. Fells the forest even in the water protection zone. That's where the Horka River flows. But this does not stop the loggers in any way. The Zalarinsky district of the Irkutsk region has been supplying the Celestial Empire with forest for several years. More recently, all the local villages were littered with roundwood, but now it is being stored along the so-called technical roads, away from prying eyes. On the way to one place of logging, we saw another. Just 300 meters from the village of Khor Agna. Here the loggers worked at night, just left. The track is still quite fresh. The brigade is still in place, they are not going anywhere from here. And the feeling of the cross piled up.
We have the documents. Oh, is there? Yes, they are officially with us. It's official, I'll show you now.
Are there? Yes, they, and all the other loggers, have complete order with their documents. But these permits are issued in Moscow, without taking into account any environmental standards. And what do Muscovites care about Baikal nature? According to the documents, everything is legal here, but in reality violations are violations. Firstly, the forest fells in huge volumes, and secondly, it fells mainly young trees. And here lies more than 1 million cubic meters of forest prepared for shipment to China. A separate conversation is how they chop. It's still an outrage. It should follow itself. The tenant is obliged to clean up after himself. Look, even now everything is under the snow, but you can still see how everything is piled up. There are stacks with wood, there is a mess. This is a fire danger zone. The forester was asked the question, why so? It burns, and what are you, for a quick bend? I believe that this should not be the case. Listen, and tell me, please, and this forest, where does it go then? Is it for the population of the Irkutsk region? No, this tenant has the right, of course, as a tenant, he has the right to send it to whom you want to sell. Who is sent to, as a rule? Well, everything is shipped and goes to China. And the locals? Local, but, as the head explained to me today, something local and suitable according to the application. If they write, they turn to him with a skilabite, so to speak, they explain some pegs on the fence there, somewhere something, waste, unnecessary material, they just like that. It turns out that look, yes, it will be mowed down from the big one, the small one will remain. This will all remain local then by the application. I did not understand, it turns out that the lion with the Chinese is a local. Yes. To bring out the forest, the so-called tenants, and these are those who have rented a plot and are felling the taiga to build even a bridge, because it is very profitable. However, the bridge will be presented as a charity. Representatives of the Ministry of Forestry of the Irkutsk region have done a lot to stop the banal theft of forests. But this is when they bring down without documents at all either on another site or in much larger volumes.
This is all solved at the level of Moscow, and why he leaves in China. The tenant has the right to decide where to send the forest to him, because he takes these plots for rent, and he prepares this forest. And he decides where he needs to send and why he needs to send. That is, this. We are in this, as if I can't comment on it to you yet.
But when everything has already been decided for them in Moscow and the forest barbarians have been given the green light, the foresters are simply powerless. The forestry agency conducts sanitary auctions, and auctions are sold tickets for logging, which means it is carried out. Harvesting begins right here from the houses, 200 meters from the settlement of Pitinsk last year, the 59th quarter means. And then they also took another 60th block nearby, also sold it at auction, near settlements. I looked at the tractor description, and the foresters showed me, I myself watched it with the deputies. The age of these allotments, which are exposed to the arm, means 40, 60 years. And what cannot be cut according to the law? When the regional authorities, who by the way are in opposition to the Kremlin, tried to restore order in the forest, the minister of the forestry complex of the Irkutsk region, Sergei Shaverda, was arrested. He is still in jail to this day. In general, this industry could bring enormous money to the budget of the Irkutsk region, but alas, all revenues go to Moscow. The capital is getting prettier, and some Irkutans live in dilapidated villages. Without roads, without electricity and even without communication. If something happens, they won't be able to call either a fire department or an ambulance.
Since the 96th year, the 8th let. There was a drunkard here, the station was raised.
And how do you connect? What's your phone number? How to call an ambulance in case of what?
And what should I say? Then I don't have a phone, but there's no phone anywhere here.
If something happens, neither an ambulance nor a fireman should be called.
Nothing.
They just don't know that somewhere in Moscow the budget is more than 2.5 trillion rubles. These people are still silent. They just haven't seen how they live in other places. When we went to visit this woman, the district head, by the way, United Russia, gave her the radio required by law. But it didn't work out to turn on the device, it turned out to be faulty. And how often does the head of the district or the head of the village happen to you?
Yes, you mean our chairman.
It happens.
He brings me groceries. They will receive money there. He brings me groceries when?
When he arrives.
You're asking me to buy it, aren't you?
I'm writing. They will receive a pension there and buy.
Do they get a pension for you?
Yes, and they buy products. And I'm not offended by that. I don't sit without food.
Most importantly, you are sitting in the 21st century without electricity, without communication.
So what? What am I going to do?
What compensation did you receive when you had a flood?
Well, House Samolovich, Vladimir Vasilyevich, right? 10,000 were brought here. Why? 3 bags of potatoes. When we drove up after the flood, we brought a bag right away, then there are 3 more bags. The bed has been brought here.
Another trouble of the Baikal region is that radioactive waste from Europe is going to be brought here. Here it is the Angarsk electrolysis chemical plant, where radioactive waste from Germany will be transported. And despite the fact that it is prohibited by law to do this, the authorities have come up with a very clever scheme. This stuff was disguised as a valuable raw material of hex, Tirana echoes. It is as if it will be recycled and everything valuable will be returned back. But the price there is only 2 or 3%. Everything else will remain in Russia forever. In total, 12,000 tons of such goods are going to be introduced into the country, in particular to the city of Angarsk and Novoselsk. Uranium hexafluoride is a volatile powdery crystalline substance that is stable when contained in a dry environment. At a temperature of 56 degrees Celsius, it passes from a solid state to a gaseous state, bypassing the liquid phase. At the same time, the saturated vapor pressure becomes equal to atmospheric pressure. But this substance is not only radiation dangerous, it is also very toxic. Inhaling 1 gram can be lethal. Dining uranium hexafluoride exhibits the same chemical properties as uranium hexafluoride in natural concentrations and therefore poses a very serious danger to the environment and humans in the event of a leak. A glimpse of this information slipped on local television.
And we start the issue with literally radioactive news, from which the whole region will surely shudder. The risk of depressurization of containers with muron hexafluoride in Angarsk, said the Commission of the Presidential Council of Russia on Human Rights. Its specialists visited the Irkutsk region. The results of the field meeting were disappointing. Detailed information about the visit is posted on the corresponding website. There is also data from Rostekhnadzor that containers with combined uranium hexafluoride are stored on the territory of the Angarsk electrolysis plant in the open air and rust.
After that, the Human Rights Council under the president was disbanded, or rather its composition was changed. Now the residents of Angarsk with the new composition of the council apparently have nothing to fear. But the truth is people don't think so. And how do you feel about the fact that radioactive waste from Europe will be brought to your city?
Negative.
How do you feel about the fact that radioactive waste from Europe will be brought to your city?
Of course, against.
Do you know about it?
Yes, I know.
Negative.
Negative.
Everything?
Do you know about it at all?
Yes.
You've seen it on Greenpeace.
And how do you feel about the fact that radioactive waste will be brought to you from Europe? Well, of course, negative.
What is it about, anyway? Naturally.
You can't just talk in neighboring Buryatia anymore. There is a completely different regional government here.
They put Alexei Sambovich Tsaidanov, a man, as I say, a Buryat-like person, who was put from the Rodenberg family here to Buryatia, allowed, when the acting uranium mining officer came, and allowed the Chinese to cut down the forest. And without hiding it, he said that we would involve investors here, as if to attract money.
Naturally, this bright face represents our dear party of power United Russia. And how else? Here the conversation with the citizens is short. That's it. With hatchets and fittings, the car was beaten and people were pulled out. And this is even more interesting. People on the bus were gassed, like terrorists in the Nordosti. Although no, something else comes to mind here. That's what the fascists did in Buchenwald. The current authorities of Beryasha have not gone far from them. Here are the famous shots where a journalist of a local TV company demands an answer for his actions from the Minister of Internal Affairs of the Republic, who feeds at the expense of the people.
You saw everything, the rest later.
Tell me, is it normal that your fighters are now pushing people away? Pushing?
Within the framework of federal law. The police officers did not violate the federal law. Please, there is no time for communication now, so study.
The Interior Minister began to run away from me, to retreat. I asked him inappropriate, in his opinion, apparently, questions, so he didn't really answer me anything. I asked what law these people violated, why they were dispersed like that, why they were pushed here, but the minister was in a hurry somewhere and said, I have answered everything to you, leave me alone, do not interfere with my work.
Anna Zueva was forced to leave her job, and the minister is still working hard to this day, probably inventing what even more sophisticated ways the people are dispersing so as not to interfere with the forest and uranium to export abroad. But not all security forces are the same. Among them there are those who deserve respect. Rosgvardia employee Viktor Kazirov recorded an appeal to his colleagues.
Freedom for political prisoners. The detentions were all illegal. Dear colleagues from Rosgvardia, I ask you not to carry out obviously criminal orders. You are someone's children, you are someone's brothers, sisters, husbands. Please do not exceed your authority. You cannot carry out obviously criminal orders.
Now the former guardsman explains the motives of his act.
Why it was me, not someone else, who made this appeal. No one asked me to do this. It was my own decision. It was, of course, caused by what we observed during the protest actions on the part of our citizens, on the part of our voters. The whole world saw, all our people, all the Russian people saw how our authorities did it. That is, they used excessive force, obviously excessive, that is, which was absolutely inadequate in comparison with what the protesters said and what they said. What were they doing at all at that time?
The corridors of power do not allow strangers here. Alexei Semenov knows a lot not only about cars, he does sports and manages the company. Residents of his district decided that the experience of a man is enough to represent the interests of the people in the city council of Ulan-Ude. He easily collected signatures and put forward his candidacy for election. But officials have not registered a new candidate. In principle, collecting 52 signatures is not such a big problem. I'll collect it, I think, as it goes. Well, in principle, I was sure of victory and most likely I would have won. But United Russia today has built up the procedure for nominating candidates in such a way that absolutely any candidate can be rejected by signatures. As a result, it turned out that all my 52 signatures turned out to be fake. That is, it appeared from somewhere, well, from somewhere, as if it were an established mechanism. There was also a graphological examination, which said that all 52 signatures are invalid. And even if I had brought all these 52 people, that is, and these are all my neighbors, people who know me and they would have come for me, and they would have confirmed that yes, I signed this number, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there is expertise, that's it, but Eastern neighbors are always welcome here. In Kubansky district of Beryasha, local authorities decided to create a Chinese agglomerate.
Behind my back is 10 hectares of land, a green belt that was not given to anyone from the locals, and now it is given to the Chinese. There will be a building of structures, its own police, its own universities, its own children's hospitals, kindergartens. It will all be its own and its jurisdiction will be completely Chinese.
and the locals are forced to huddle in huts. This place is called Pozlai. In fact, it is a suburb of Ulan-Ude, which has grown to the scale of a city. People transported old houses from dying villages here and assembled them in a new place. It looks like the whole republic has gathered here. There is no national treasure, that is, there is no gas here. They are heated by coal and waste sawmills working for China. Here is such a smog standing over the capital. All these are stoves.
These are the ideas of old little houses, these are the ruined Republic of Buryatia. These are hundreds and dozens of villages that have collapsed. Agriculture has practically disappeared in the Republic of Buryatia. The village was settled. It was the old believer village of Semiskaya. When Catherine moved here, it was 2.5 streets. To date, it has grown 50 times. These houses are all, this is the impudence. These people moved, transported somehow, neighbors helped, because there is no work. Everything was disappeared. And look, you see, this is already secondary housing. Small baths were transported. Those who had the opportunity, they transported at home, and those who did not have the opportunity, they even transported some of their own cooks, something else. Here's a look, here's everything, differently configured. Different. Many houses are in the flood zone. Now some of them are legalized, some are not legalized. And people are forced to go closer to the city in search of some kind of work, to do something.
Local public figures have to correct the situation caused by the barbarity of the authorities.
The power of people divides, and on a national basis, and most importantly, people are divided into prosperous and disadvantaged. Disadvantaged, impoverished people who do not even have a salary of about 15,000, although the authorities tell us stories about 42,000, 70,000 the average salary in Buryatia. In fact, the situation is such that many people do not have a job, and in order to unite people, I have built a church.
The building behind me is exactly the same plant that was prepared for pumping Baikal water and sending it to the People's Republic of China. The project was approved in Moscow, but, fortunately, it was stopped thanks to the efforts of local authorities. Yes, you heard right, and Baikal itself was also sold with giblets. This plant was supposed to pump water from the sacred lake and prepare it for shipment to China. And despite the fact that environmentalists and economists are not sounding the alarm about this yet, it does not seem to disrupt the ecosystem. For the locals, the construction site was the last straw.
Here everything was rummaged, dug up, concreted, laid. Here the pipes were lying, they went straight to Lake Baikal. Chinese businessmen have launched their tentacles to us in Baikal. Everything here has been violated and fossilized. What would be here if this plant, well, hadn't been closed?
I closed it.
They were closed on Levchenko's instructions by the Tyros court. We found incorrectly drawn up contracts. But it also saved this area, this is our homeland. I think that we, the residents of Baikal, we have preserved, are preserving and will continue to preserve. This is our homeland.
Well, they saved it, but who's going to clean up everything?
Well, we need to ask those Chinese businessmen a question, and the leadership of our Irkutsk region should ask who dug it all up, did everything. It is necessary, of course, to restore. That's not how it's done. That's all. If everything and we get fucked up and it comes up, what will we have left with our homeland?
All this is happening against the background of unprecedented pressure on the governor of the Irkutsk region, Sergei Levchenko. The reason for this lies in the fact that the leaders of the region are not from the ruling caste of the Kremlin. He refused to join United Russia, and he does not represent the interests of oligarchs close to the body. Well, I won't speak for law enforcement agencies. The information attacks on the governor themselves began with us about a year ago. It was probably at the end of December last year. He said at a press conference that he would go for a second term, and literally 2 days later the first stories appeared on our federal channels. And just like that, they appeared in sluggish waves somewhere, probably, until September. And September is getting stronger. But these last 2 weeks, 3, probably even the last 3 weeks, well, in this VA, federal TV channels are working on us in an emergency mode, despite the fact that all the major TV channels have intervened. And if we take, for example, some stories from Tuluan, because very often they cling to the Mingtun tragedy, because it is so revealing. You can always find dissatisfied people, because, well, relatively speaking, we have already settled 10,000 people in houses, but now they have found 10 dissatisfied people who either have not received, or cannot receive material payments, or have not received certificates for certain reasons. And they showed all these 10 people on the screens of 5 federal channels. These 10 people are everywhere with them, as if they were moving from one channel to another channel. On the same day, we worked on these people point by point, found out all their problems and all their causes. But it also turned out that just basically these stories were pulled and twisted, turned upside down. Oh, yes, we forgot to tell you about Tula. In fact, they did not forget, but simply did not do it. Let the state media do it for budget money. Now it is fashionable to hand the governor of the Irkutsk region for flooding the village. In fact, I would like to say that the village was flooded after the gateway was simply opened at this very Irkutsk hydroelectric power station owned by the billionaire oligarch Deripaska.